I'm so excited you're here. I'm so excited to share the wisdom of our guests with you. So I'll introduce them and then the topic, and then off we go. So Catherine Marr is Executive Director of the Wikimedia Foundation, which operates Wikipedia, the 5th largest website in the world. Her expertise is at the intersection of technology, human rights, democracy, and international development. Welcome, Catherine. And we have Nick Higgins, who's the Chief Librarian at the Brooklyn Public Library, in charge of public services across Brooklyn's 59 libraries. Come on, you don't just slow walk, you can just like full speed walk. He created a citywide library-based video visiting service for kids with incarcerated parents, among his many other achievements during his time there. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to introduce the topic a bit, knowledge for the people, what do we mean when we say that? Well, we're here to grapple with what is the future of public knowledge, and not just in general, but in this moment in history, in a changing technological and socio-political landscape. So if knowledge is power, and we want power to the people, how do we ensure people's access to knowledge? And especially in this digital age, what's the future of the library and the encyclopedia? So I've got lots of questions, they've got lots of answers. But first I want to ask you some questions. Who in the audience has a library card? Right. That's bananas. I love it. Who's been to a library in the last year? So these are our people. Yes. The self-selection is real strong. Who has actually checked out a book in the last month? So dwindling, okay. So how many books are checked out in a year from the library? Give us some context,
So, thank you all for checking out books at the public library. And the public library is also free, and you all are my people, so thank you so much. So we have 8 million books were checked out, 8 million books and DVDs and all that kind of thing were checked out from the library last year in Brooklyn. There's 8 million.
So there's about 2.6 million people in Brooklyn, and about 1 million of those people go to the library for some reason every year.
Yes, right. For many
Not
reasons.
just to check out books, but how awesome are books?
Awesome.
Awesome.
All the way awesome. Okay, I have more questions for you. Who here has ever used Wikipedia? So these are also your people. Who used Wikipedia today? Who used Wikipedia in the last month to win an argument? This is the most important question. So give us a little bit of scale around how many people are using Wikipedia in a given day or year.
Yeah, Wikipedia is pretty big. It is the 5th most popular website on the planet. Every single month we have 1.5 billion devices that visit Wikipedia. I can't tell you how many people that is because our privacy policies mean that we do not track you. Much like a library.
Thank you very much.
We respect what you read, but we estimate it's about 1 billion folks. And then, there's 50 million articles on Wikipedia these days.
And 92 billion pages are viewed every year.
60,000 hours a month you all read. Oh no, 60,000 years a month. Sorry, you read 60,000 years a month on Wikipedia.
What does that mean?
It means...
How do you read a year? Am I doing it wrong? I'm reading books and as much of the internet as I can digest.
It means people are thirsty for knowledge.
All right, we'll just leave it there for now. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about who's using these services. What can you tell us about the demographics of your users? Who are the people going into the libraries and going into Wikipedia? I know you're not tracking us but like,
No.
but
No.
what do you know?
We know. I mean, listen, I mean, the people who use the library are the people of Brooklyn, right? So Brooklyn uses the public library. Everybody is welcome in a public library. There's no restrictions to access. There's no age limit, economic background, anything like that. It's all free. You come in, and there's something for you to do. So, like one of the beautiful things about the library is that you see what is on the street in Brooklyn in a space that's for everyone, and with shared resources, and everyone has responsibility for those resources. And it's that's you all use the library, they all use the library, we all use the library.
Who's not using the library?
I don't know. They're like everybody uses the library, right? I mean, who's not using the library?
I think actually, like, this is super embarrassing to say, but I think it's me.
It could be you. It could
I
be
think
you.
it's like the people who work a lot and they're just like, I'll Google it, it's fine, and they don't go.
Yeah.
But if you Google it and you find yourself on Wikipedia, you're probably using the library because we work very closely with librarians, and most of the citations and sources end up back at the same sort of sources that you'd find in a library. And in fact, just this month, just on Tuesday, we launched a big campaign, not launched, it's this annual campaign around asking every librarian to add a source to Wikipedia. One librarian, one reference. So no matter where you are, you're using libraries.
I thought I was like too cool for libraries. False. Actually, I have proof that I'm not too cool for libraries. If we can make this go. So this is tiny Ayana. In Fort Greene, Brooklyn, in 1983, I was 3 years old. Those are my parents. Those are bags of leaves that are going to be composted because we were trendsetters. And I have two anecdotes I want to tell you about the library. They're very short. One is, you talk about, like, I'm going to name my firstborn child after you. Well, I was actually kind of named after the library, roundabout way. My mother, white lady, was like, I want to give my kid a black name. I'm going to do some research. Went to the public library in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, took out a book on African names and was like, Ayana, beautiful flower, done. And I was like, Mom, you couldn't get past A? Like, so my name is because of the public library.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And also, I learned to write because of the library. So when I was 3 years old, in this picture, I wanted my own library card to check out my own books. And as you said, there's no age restrictions on who gets to go, but you do have to be able to write your own name to get a library card. So my mother made me practice ones. And I learned to write my name specifically so I could get my own library card.
That looks like our current library card. Right there. Did you design our library card?
And there's food on like everything I own, so there's also food on that library card. But that's how important the library was to me. That's like how I got named and what motivated me to like learn to write. So thank you.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful story. I'm so happy. I mean, like I think everybody has their sort of like library origin story, and this one's probably the sweetest I've ever heard.
Well, I mean, it is like cute family photo. I tried to use a different photo. I actually like texted my mom this morning. I was like, "Do you have my like library card?" She still has it, and she like found the photo and everything. She was like, "This is how old you were," and like you can. It was a very cute like texting moment this morning that happened. So I use the library. You use the library. What's the who's not? And Wikipedia is public, but like who's not able to access Wikipedia? There's a story there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the same people who use the library are the people who use Wikipedia, but I think the thing that we don't offer is a warm, safe space. And so one of the things that I'm really struck by with libraries, and one of the reasons I think they're so critical in our communities, is that they offer safety of the mind, they offer safety of thought, but they also offer safety of the body and of the soul. And I was at a conference for librarians earlier this year, and they were talking about that as increasingly the mission of libraries is not just to nourish and feed the mind, but also sometimes to actually feed the body, and certainly to feed the heart, and sometimes to feed citizenship. And I think that's been a really big part of what Brooklyn Public Library has done, but is increasingly the trend of libraries across the nation. So we exist in a digital space, which is limited by access, by cost, by device, by literacy, all of these different things, although we work very hard at Wikipedia, and there's some folks from the Wikimedia Foundation here in the audience, and so thank you, as well as also Wikipedians here in the audience. Those are the volunteers who write Wikipedia. Thank you, because what they do is they try to make all of this knowledge accessible to everyone, but we do recognize there are limitations, and that's where our partnerships with all these physical institutions really become so critically important.
And to expand on that about who's not getting it, you mentioned earlier there are over 2 billion people who are locked out of Wikipedia, who can't access it online.
That's right. So currently we are blocked in China, in Turkey, and intermittently as of this week in Venezuela.
And what'd you do to get blocked?
If you think an encyclopedia is just an encyclopedia, then you live in a place where you have a tremendous amount of freedom. In most places in the world, knowledge is incredibly powerful, and in many places in the world, people will do many things to restrict access to that knowledge. And so in these countries, I can't tell you specifically what was done, but it is clear that knowledge on Wikipedia made some people in power uncomfortable with their populations having access to that knowledge, and we have been blocked.
To expand on what both of you are saying about the physical space that libraries provide for community and nurturing, Nick, you shared with me an op-ed by Eric Kleinberg in the New York Times earlier this year. I just wanted to read a short passage from this, which says, "The problems libraries face today isn't irrelevance. Indeed, in New York and many other cities, library circulation, program attendance, and average hours spent visiting are up. The real problem that libraries face is that so many people are using them, and for such a wide variety of purposes that library systems and their employees are overwhelmed. According to a 2016 survey conducted by the Pew Research Center, about half of all Americans aged 16 and over used a public library in the past year, and 2/3 of them say that closing their local branch would have a major impact on their community." So in that context, and we've talked about libraries are much more than borrowing books, I'd love for you to share some of the other reasons that libraries have become so critically important to communities in this moment in time.
Yeah, in that Kleinenberg article in the book that he wrote, Palaces for the People, it's sort of like a love letter to public libraries in many ways, but also what he calls social infrastructure. So this idea that places or neighborhoods that have a good amount or a good concentration of like social places, places that where people can be seen and where people can be heard, and people can get together, like places of worship, small businesses, public libraries, will have greater and more positive social and health outcomes than neighborhoods that have similar demographics, that don't have those examples of social infrastructure. And so I agree with that statement. I think that people are using the public libraries for all sorts of things. So to meet all sorts of needs. And that's sort of like my idea for a public library is like librarians don't just refer you to books, but they meet you where you're at. So you have a question about anything that's on your mind, any resource that you need to access, any community agency that you need to go to, and a public library could help you, direct you in the right direction. So we build services for the 37% of Brooklynites who are foreign-born. So when somebody walks into a library, they see their languages represented on the shelves and the books that we have there and the signage, languages that are offered in the programming is in their language. There's citizenship access. There's free legal services in multiple languages. There's a lot of programs that we run for people who are experiencing homelessness. You talked about a safe space.
The library is often a place people go to stay warm in the winter if they're homeless.
Which is great. I mean, I think this is, we're accessible, we're open, we're inclusive. It's another place where you can just like go and not be hassled. And there's no other place, really, that's sort of like that. I mean, we are a non-commercial space that is accessible and inclusive for everyone, no matter what your need is. And sometimes your need is just to get off the street and get warm. And I think it's the challenge of a public library is to, like, once somebody needs more than those sort of like basic needs, like how do we adapt, and how can we meet the needs that are a little bit more acute than that?
Because this article also was describing the fact that people who are sort of other public institutions don't know what to do with them. They're like, I don't know, go to the library. So librarians are having to become this like front line for social service distribution in a lot of ways. Is that true? Yes,
I would say that there is a lot of stress. I also think in the article there was like this comment that things do happen in a public library. People get stressed out, and there's some aggression sometimes, and there are fights that break out. There are incidents that happen, but it's thank goodness that it doesn't happen as frequently as you might suppose if your doors were completely porous and you're sort of like there's no separation between you and the street. I would.
Could you try lifting your mic a little to see if we get? There we go.
Is that a little bit better? Was there some squeaky kind of like mice and feedback?
We're just gonna keep problem solving as we go.
We're
just
pretty good
learn
at
as we
problem
go.
Iterative.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I think that there's like the role of a librarian is certainly changing, and we need to recognize the fact and give the librarian support too. I mean, we've added a social worker and a social work team to the Brooklyn Public Library to primarily work with people who are experiencing homelessness, to get them the help that they need, but it's also just helping staff too, who are, like you say, on the front lines. And there's, even though it doesn't happen as frequently as you might expect, it still happens with a degree of frequency that takes its toll on staff who are just like hanging out in the library and like seeing this day to day, day in, day out. So it's offering that kind of support for staff and for the public at the same time.
So there's Wikipedia, which we're all familiar with, but what the organization that you run is actually the Wikimedia Foundation, which does much more than even what Wikipedia is. So maybe you could share with us a little bit of like, what are some of the other things that you've got going on?
So Wikipedia is definitely the best known of the Wikimedia Foundation projects. And I say Wikimedia Foundation projects, but really we believe like they're your projects. We call them projects. Wikipedia is a project. There's other ones, but they're created by people. They're supported by the public in terms of donations. They belong to all of you. But the Wikipedia is definitely the best known because it's the encyclopedia. It's been around the longest, but we also have projects like Wikimedia Commons, which is the largest sort of free educational media repository on the web. So every single image, every single media file, 3D file, sound file on there is Creative Commons licensed, which means that you can use it and remix it, which is really important to us. We believe in free, not as in just access, but free as in reuse. And then there's Wikidata, which is our free open structured data project, which is increasingly important for us because we want to make sure that knowledge is accessible in lots of different ways, but also to machines and people who are interested in sort of deriving inferences that you can't necessarily get out of Wikipedia today. And I think the reason we call ourselves the Wikimedia Foundation, and the reason a person who edits Wikipedia often thinks of themselves as a Wikimedian rather than a Wikipedian, is that we believe that all knowledge should be free, and the encyclopedia represents a type of knowledge, but there's certainly many more forms of knowledge that we want to get into and explore. So Wikipedia is just like, I think of it as the first step.
Yeah. The
15 million
gateway drug to
articles.
all knowledge. So Nick, we have some slides showing some of the specific programs that you're doing in the community that are not loaning books. So I'm hoping you can tell us what's happening in this photo.
So this is Tell a Story. This is a project that I had started maybe 5 years ago. So I started out as a jail librarian. So I sort of cut my teeth as a librarian, pushing around book carts in Rikers Island. And I was always trying to think about new programs to start with people to connect them better, not only to their families and loved ones on the outside, but also to community-based organizations like a library to help people sort of transition back into the community. And
You see now why like we invited him here. He's not just like a librarian. He's like the coolest librarian. It gets
all
better.
right,
It
I
gets
get a little
better.
kind of shy about that kind of
I was
stuff.
say all librarians are pretty cool. Just like.
Librarians are pretty cool. So this is, so at the same time that I was thinking about this, I started reading up on video visit services that were starting to proliferate across the country. And I was very suspicious, as were a lot of prison abolitionists and also even like prison reformists. They were suspicious of this new advent of technology that connected people by video, because there were these large telecommunication companies, namely like JPay and Securus, who were giving the municipal jails and state prisons access to this equipment for free, but then they would pass along the cost to families to use the service. And it was horrendous. It was like for a 20-minute video call that had, kind of like video that was like really shaky or audio that didn't work all the time. They would charge them like $13 for a 20-minute call, and they would largely they would eliminate in-person visits to drive everybody to the video visitation service. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. First of all, it had to be free. Free, right? We're free for people to use. It had to be community-based and easy to access. So I thought, what better way? We have like 59 libraries in Brooklyn. We have a tremendous real estate footprint. We're in every neighborhood in Brooklyn. People can get to us. They can walk down the street the same way that I take my son to the library and read a book to him. I just wanted to make sure that people who are incarcerated on this really despicable place called Rikers Island can also have the same opportunity to read books with their kids anytime that they want it in the comfort of a library. And so to have the service, we set it up. It's really like families can call us on the phone and say they have somebody they'd like to visit with at Rikers Island or one of the other jails in the city. And we basically, it's a long story short, and there's a lot more complicated than this, but we connect to a jail on Rikers Island. We have the kids and the families come into the library. We set it up with a bunch of different books and toys, and dad or mom who's sitting at the jail have matching set of books, so they can just read books together. They don't have to read books together. We don't care. They can just like look at each other and smile. They can sing songs together, whatever they want to do. It's like their time. And we let them do it as many times as they want, throughout the week. So that's one of the programs.
I'm sure she's reading very well.
Oh, she is, and this is part of the program too. So we offer staff to family members too, in case they need to, take a break. They want to have somebody, a librarian. This is one of our another really cool librarian who works at the Central Library. Who's reading along with the family through the video. You'll notice too that we set these things up in these sort of semi-private rooms, like they're glassed in. But you can't. So like this is the rest of the library beyond that. So all this activity is happening in the Central Library, and you sort of like look into these breakout rooms that are glassed in, and you can sort of see like kids reading to a screen or like having fun playing with toys or whatever, but you don't really understand like what's actually happening. But it's important for us to sort of have this in a semi-public area so people don't feel like they're being shuttled off into a corner or hidden behind a door. We want to really address the stigma, the unnecessary stigma that people sort of carry around with them if they're involved in the justice system. So we intentionally set up these spaces to be very, very public. But also give some privacy to the families. All right, some more kids, some more cute kids.
I can't help myself.
I just like look at the kids and reading with Beaker, I guess was that one. So
This is a science event, so
Beaker,
you got to
right,
show
that's
like
perfect.
the science toys.
No, I appreciate this. This is one of our. So we also run an immigration program that focuses really on access to legal services and citizenship. About 5 years ago, when we were developing the Tell a Story program, we also brought in somebody to help run our immigrant services or develop them. So ultimately, what we do is we offer one-on-one free legal services in Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Russian that deal with all sorts of cases. So they're OLAP accredited, formerly BIA, Board of Immigration Appeals accredited, so they can actually help people with paperwork and whatnot. And
So you partner with the Immigrant Justice Corps to do this?
Yeah,
and
Immigrant
it's not
Justice
like librarians have to learn all of this as well,
Yeah.
but there's a partnership and a place for people to go.
Right. So to the point earlier, like librarians are, more.
Superheroes.
They're superheroes, but there's certain things that we cannot do. We're not attorneys, so we bring those folks in.
And the last thing I'll say on this before we move on and get some beautiful images from Wikimedia is that this is especially an issue right now because of this question of whether there's going to be a citizenship question on the new census form. And so you have this opportunity for people to go to the library and get some information about, like, what do I do with that? How do I respond?
And the citizenship, the 2020 census is going to be 80% online. So we are the largest provider of public, internet access in the borough. So the library is going to shoulder a lot of the responsibility for getting an accurate count. We want an accurate count, but we also understand that we've built a lot of trust with the communities in Brooklyn, and adding a citizenship question onto the 2020 census is, it compromises that. Let's put it that way. So we had a victory a couple of days ago, the first step on the way to the Supreme Court, I think. And hopefully we can carry the momentum through and not have the citizenship question on the 2020 census.
So be an active citizen, prevent this question from going on the census. So thank you for that. And there's more where that came from. I think it's so exciting to hear about what is a library in 2019. It's just something very different than we had imagined it would be or would need to be to meet the needs of neighbors and citizens. So, Catherine, we have some pictures from you. We've got like a Wakanda Forever going on in the front row, which I'm stoked about.
That is a little Wakanda Forever, yeah. It's actually like Wiki Wakanda Forever was what they were going for.
Is there like a W? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not in charge of handshakes.
This is actually what Wikimedians do.
Oh, that's very cute. Don't do that unless you're actually a Wikimedian. Start editing pages or forget you ever saw that.
By being here, you're a Wikimedian. We embrace you.
Tell us about this. What's going on here?
So this is our annual conference. This is some of the folks who attended. We do one every single year. It's called Wikimania. It's been going on for 15 years. I'm looking at the Wikimedians in the audience. Yep, I'm getting the nod. 15 years. This is Wikimania in Cape Town. It was our first ever in sub-Saharan Africa. I note that because the Egyptians would be upset if I hadn't. And it was a fantastic event. I think we had about 1,000 folks, which is a little small just because of the logistics. And it's the annual thing that we do to get people together. The theme of this one was about Ubuntu in knowledge, and a big focus of our work going forward is what we call knowledge equity. So our organization, our community across the globe, which includes 100 affiliate organizations all around the world, the Wikimedia Foundation is one of the many organizations that supports Wikipedia and the Wikimedia community. We call it a movement for free knowledge. Is it really thinking about who has been left out by structures of power and privilege in knowledge creation, formation, and representation. And so part of the conversation and part of our intention in going to Cape Town this year was really thinking about how do we very intentionally invest in parts of the world that have not previously been engaged in the Wikimedia community, or even just the canon, like who decides that? And this is a conference this is another event. It's at a Wikimedia North America conference, which is hosted, we do regional conferences every year. And so this was folks from the Caribbean, from Canada, the US, and Mexico. And this was actually the beginning of the process that we were getting into around deciding what we want our priorities to be as we go forward as a community. So the Wikimedia's vision statement is a world in which every single human can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. And I think that is just an incredibly powerful and beautiful statement. For me, it means really like 4 things. Every single human means everybody has the right to access knowledge. We say share in, which means participate, not just consume. So add, create, curate, remix. All knowledge, which means that all knowledge has value. Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what country, what language, what culture, what community. And then I think my favorite part about it is the implicit part, which is it says nothing about Wikipedia. Everybody who shares that vision is a part of the vision that we share. And so this was part of those conversations. And as you'll see, this is almost all female or women identifying people, which is really powerful because unfortunately on Wikipedia, but on the internet as a whole, women and non-male identified folks tend to be woefully underrepresented, and so this is just a huge part of what we're trying to do.
Give us the numbers on that lack of representation.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, I think it was in 2010, folks counted for the first time the number of biographies on English Wikipedia that were about women, and what they found was that it was 15%. 15% of about 1.3 million biographies at the time. Certainly that does not reflect the contributions of women in the world over time, or non-male identified folks. And over the last couple of years, people have been making a concerted effort to address this, what we call the gender gap. That now it's about 18%, which doesn't sound like much, but actually works out to about 75 new biographies every single day. So if you think of this as like, Wikipedia is like artisanal, right? We're in Brooklyn, it's artisanal, it's hand created. Yeah, okay. Thought I was gonna get a bigger laugh on that. That's 75 artisanal biographies every day. But I do just wanna, I wanna call that out, that is English Wikipedia. Welsh Wikipedia has and I don't mean to, we always try to be really careful about this. It has parity between men and women, but we often talk about the fact that even in that we tend to obscure, just in terms of the way that pronouns are used on Wikipedia, people who don't identify within that binary. But it is really a range, and we see these gaps, and we recognize that this is not just a gender issue, this is really
It's also, I'm sure, a racial
else.
issue and a socioeconomic issue
bet.
and all these other
A
layers
geographic
of
issue.
who's represented.
Yeah.
So as a scientist, I can say I'm very excited that a bunch of badass women scientists have been pushing, actually just creating Wikipedia pages for other notable women scientists. And I think in the last year, it's been like 326 or something new pages they've created on women scientific experts. So this is something that like you can just decide to do and then do 2 of them every weekend, and then
And I want
you've
to call
changed the internet.
Yeah, exactly. You can change the internet. You can make it better. And I want to call out, because there have been incredible projects from within the Wikimedia community space who really do tend to be the first to see these issues and then engage and address them, like Wiki Women in Red, Afro Crowd, which is an effort to address some of the racial disparities on Wikipedia, which if you are interested, find me after. There are Wikipedians in the audience. They are psyched
Can
to
we
get your
just
names.
have all the Wikipedians raise your hands? Thank you for what you do for public knowledge and the internet.
Come to their events.
Come to their events. There's a whole chapter here in New York. They'll teach you how to edit Wikipedia, and they seem like cool folks. So just like go
They're
be
pretty cool
artisanal
folks.
with them. So here, this is also from a Wikimedia conference.
This was part of the strategy conference that we were focused on. This is Felix and Sudeep and Stalanjit and Manpreet, and they are from Ghana and many different parts of India, respectively. And what they're, part of the conversations that we've been focused on is not just how to engage with questions of knowledge, equity, and representation, but also what does it mean to do projects like we do projects with what we call our GLAM community, which is galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. What does that look like if you come from Ghana? You know, there's this whole discourse happening right now in the museum space around repatriation of artifacts, around what does it mean to have representation? How do you do that, not just in the sense of the colonialist, like the colonial dynamic, but also the creolization of those artifacts now? And what does it mean to represent this when institutions are weak, or where you don't necessarily have a culture around free knowledge, or perhaps you don't have copyright policies that enable you to share freely? And so these are some of the conversations that are happening within our communities today. And one of the things we're really trying to make space within the Wikimedia space is, y'all are probably mostly familiar with English Wikipedia, but that's 5 million articles out of 50 million, which means that the majority of Wikipedia does not happen in English. And so how do we give more space and power to folks outside of North America, outside of the English-speaking world? And these represent, I think, the future of Wikipedia, these folks right behind me.
So there's 300 languages or so represented on Wikipedia.
I think it's like 302 now. Yeah.
I'm gonna take liberty and go back, and I think this slide is really important because Catherine's in the back and she's listening, which is the sign of a good leader. She's clearly been like hearing from the community, and I think that's what makes Wikipedia work. It's the community, right? So, so thanks for listening. And tell us about this.
Oh, I love this. This is the president of Wikimedia Mexico, Ivan Martinez, and this represents, I think, the power of what Wikipedia can be in the world. We talk about wanting to be the essential infrastructure for free knowledge. And in Mexico, we're signing an agreement with the Mexican Ministry of Culture to partner with all of the institutions, cultural institutions in Mexico, to bring the heritage of Mexico in all of its different languages and all of its diversity into the Wikimedia ecosystem. The thing to know about Wikimedia is that we're open, licensed, everything is Creative Commons, everything is free. So when we talk about doing this, it's really just sort of a holding place for the world to engage with. And so this partnership with the Mexican Ministry of Culture is a way of digitizing all of, I don't want to use the word patrimony, all of the heritage of Mexico and all of the current contemporary culture of Mexico in a way that means that people who will never get the chance to visit Mexico, who will never get to go to their amazing anthropological museum, will have the ability to engage with this no matter where they are, no matter who they are, and well off the Wikimedia projects themselves. And so these are the sort of things we increasingly do. We have a project very similar, partnership with the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York. These are the sort of things that we're seeking to do all over the world because we want to be the thing that elevates knowledge. We want to be the platform that takes those 1.5 billion devices that visit every single month and make sure that institutions that have a similar public knowledge mission have access to that public so that we can bring that mission to the public and our public to the mission.
Awesome. Go ahead and clap. Deb, don't hold back. And then there's just all of these public,
gorgeous photos. These are all Creative Commons images.
Was anyone here at the first Science and Society where we talked about the future of seafood? Got like, a handful. So we talked about seaweed a lot. So this is like the thread that runs through.
So these all come from, this previous image was Wiki Loves Africa, this is Wiki Loves Earth, the next image I believe is this is also Wiki Loves Monuments, or maybe Wiki Loves Earth. Wikimedia Commons runs the world's largest photography competition, so if you are a photographer in the audience, by all means, we always, on an annual basis, run competitions around sharing beautiful photos of your environment, your built environment. Wiki Loves Africa tends to focus on really addressing issues of representation, so that image was around work in Africa, or issues of representation of Africans, and the idea is to show the world from the world's perspective, as opposed to from the perspective of sort of a globe-trotting photographer. And so some of these images, I wish I knew where that was.
This is
Dolomites, maybe?
I read the caption. This is in the center of mainland Greece, of all places. I didn't realize Greece had such topography, but it is a monastery in Greece.
And so it's just a beautiful way to see the world through the world's eyes.
Yeah. So Catherine, you talked a bit about the gaps that exist and how you're filling them. Nick, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the gaps that we don't yet know about that the library is still trying to figure out how exactly to fill?
So there are a lot of gaps, right? Because there's no end to sort of like the need in particular communities. So oftentimes we just have to wait for people to ask what they need, and we can respond to it. But certainly gaps in public libraries are, so librarians like to open doors for people. They don't like to say no to any question that you bring up to them. So there's always another book to recommend. There's always another resource that you can connect to. There's always another community agency to refer people to. But in the case of people, again, there are 60,000 people in the city, 62,000 people in the city who are living in shelters. In the city, that's the highest that it's ever been since the Great Depression. I remember when I came into the job about 5 years ago, I was astounded that there were like 50,000 people who were living in the shelter system. People are living in shelters for longer periods of time. They're living there for a year. There are more children in shelters in the city than ever before. And people are just experiencing economic disparity. People are without homes, and they are using the library. They're looking for help in the library. So there's something that we need to do. We need to partner more with other professional professions, including social workers, I think, to bring social workers in libraries to help us sort of put the puzzle together for people a little bit better than what we're doing. because we simply don't have the expertise to do that. So I think just like understanding sort of our limitations as an institution, we can't solve everyone's problem with the tools that we have. So just figuring out sort of what other professions can fit into a library setting, and it's not going to be always like really easy and clean, but I think that's where we need to go.
What about on a more like practical level about like the types of books and information that's available in the library? Are there gaps there, and who decides what books are in the library? Is that you, Chief Librarian?
Not me. We have selectors, so we do have.
Oh my God, that's like, imagine if you're a DJ but also a librarian.
Yeah.
The
That's
coolest person ever.
Yeah, it's great. It's actually the best, one of the best jobs. Like I thought going into libraries, I thought that's what I'd be doing all day is like reading books and like referring, and purchasing books. But that's not the case. We do have librarians who are selectors for the system, and we do make choices. I rarely weigh in on the titles that need to come into our libraries.
Was there one you're like, we gotta have this book?
The Gutenberg Bible. I don't know.
So you started out as like a rare books nerd, yes? At some point?
Actually, yeah. So that was
Tell
another
us your
thing.
nerdiest secrets.
So I'm a librarian, so I'm a little shy just by nature, and I love libraries because they're sort of anonymous spaces that as a kid, like we moved around a lot. So I found refuge in my public libraries in any town that we sort of dropped, and I could just sort of go in and into these spaces, and staff were helpful if you wanted them to be, but they would also just sort of like leave you alone if that's what you wanted to be left alone, and I just found a home there, and I was a book nerd, and I read a lot, and I felt that would have been like to page through these beautiful artifacts, these beautiful objects for the rest of my life would have been a really great trajectory for me. So I took a bunch of rare books classes in graduate school, but I also got a job at the public library, which like blew my mind. Like
So you've been there for 12 years now in all sorts of different roles.
Yeah, about 12, 13 years. I was living in Brooklyn for a number of years, and I didn't really know Brooklyn all that well. So when I came to the public library, what they did, they put me in a neighborhood library for like 3 months, and then they would bring me to another neighborhood library for 3 months, and then another neighborhood library for 3 months. So I got to see Brooklyn in my early career as a librarian, and I understood almost immediately that each neighborhood, first of all, neighborhoods in Brooklyn were fiercely loyal to the identity of our own neighborhoods, and we're so proud of the identities of our neighborhoods, but we also
Fort
have
Greene, do or die.
Red Hook, do or die. So people are going to come in. It was just so exciting that different neighborhoods and different people in different neighborhoods had such vastly different needs, and I felt like as a librarian, it would be really wonderful to have that dynamic career.
Was there a moment that you were like, rare books, cute, but like the library is where it's at?
I think I was just sort of like elbow deep or knee deep in like 8-year-olds at McKinley Park branch. It was like wall-to-wall kids, and there was no custodian on staff. There was no children's librarian, so I had to jump in and like do read books and sing songs to all these kids. Kid like threw up all over the floor.
To say, I'm imagining.
I want to do this every day
do this
forever.
for the rest of my
There's like
life.
Go-Gurt everywhere, just like everywhere.
It was like it was so active, and it was like it was beautiful in a way. Like people were like loved the space. People knew one another when they walked into in the doors. Like the staff, like all of my library colleagues knew everyone's name. It just felt like home, much like it felt like home when I was like 8 and going into a library in a new town.
This is like so heartwarming. I almost like
I'm getting a little verklempt.
flummoxed. Yeah. Choose your non-English word of choice. So I think, Catherine, back to you. We're talking about like who decides what's in the library and what services are there. How does that work at Wikimedia Foundation, but also Wikipedia? I mean, we have to answer Jana's question about her personal page, because I know this is a question you get at every single cocktail party you go to, like my personal Wikipedia page, inaccurate, what can be done about that? And then I'm just going to wrap a bunch of like messy questions into one here. Self-aware but not self-editing. My mother has a related question. And if I don't ask it now, I'll forget and I'll be in trouble. So the question is, as far as like what information gets in there, what about like the bad guy companies that want to put information on that makes them look good, like maybe, for example, Monsanto?
I've never met Ayana's mother, but I feel like I know Ayana's mother by now. So the one answer is the Wikimedia Foundation does not set editorial policy on Wikipedia. Actually, Wikipedians have been setting editorial policy for many years. It came up earlier today in a conversation about like, how has Wikipedia been affected by fake news? And I was like, Wikipedians have been dealing with that for 18 years. Like, it hasn't, the same as it's always been affected. Like, they're really, really good at figuring this out because Wikipedians really rely on sort of 3 core policies, one of which is information has to be cited back to a reliable source, which is all about verifiability. It has to be neutral in the sense that, like, I think New York may be the greatest city in the world, but that's not going to fly on Wikipedia, and no original research. So if you're Galileo and you're like, hey, this whole sort of geocentrism thing is kind of BS, that's also not going to work. You're going to get blocked. Like, you gotta go through peer review, right? And the reality is that Wikipedia has really kind of pulls, I think of it as 3 distinct traditions that are not distinct necessarily, interrelated traditions, one of which is it pulls from the context of academia, which is more eyes make for a better product. You have to go through a jury of your peers, and it's going to be poked, it's going to be proud, it's going to be uncomfortable, but at the end, it's going to be a better result. Our founder, Jimmy Wales, refers to it a little bit like the way a diamond is made. You take a whole mess of carbon and you subject it to a tremendous amount of pressure, and at the end you have something really beautiful and clear, and that is a Wikipedia article. So the more controversial an article is, chances are actually the higher quality it is. We used to use President Obama's article as a performance testing metric based on all the citations. Now we use President Trump's. So the other part about it is, so the concept of peer review, the traditions of journalism, you have to have sources. I think that, what's the expression, like if you're a journalist and your mother tells her that she loves you, like get us, like verify.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. And then the last one is this.
Catherine's mother's in the audience. Catherine's mother. Do you love Catherine?
I'd like to say my mom is also a social worker who works with libraries.
Oh my gosh, great.
Can your dad verify your mother's love for you? Do we need to get like a totally unrelated?
I have my brother too, so I've
Okay.
got multiple citations.
I don't know. These are super biased. Can your
Actually,
family edit your page?
we are gonna get to that. I was gonna loop back around. Yeah.
This
okay.
is amazing.
And
Tell
so
us more.
and so the third thing is really the scientific. Like, I think of the scientific method. You run experiments, and when your data changes, your understanding changes. So Wikipedia changes all the time, literally 350 edits a minute, because knowledge changes all the time. And a great example of this is when the very first Encyclopedia Britannica rolled into the public domain, Wikipedians were so excited because they were going to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and they were going to take all the articles and they were going to import them into Wikipedia, and it was going to be great. And when they did it, they realized not a single article would hold up to the way that we think about the world today. Because knowledge changes all the time. So, like, I actually think of Wikipedia as a negotiation of power 350 times a minute. Who holds power? Who holds narrative power? Like, where do we understand the world from? What perspectives, et cetera, et cetera. So we're constantly reinterpreting the way that we understand the world based on knowledge that's accessible. We check our sources, and we subject it all to peer review. So that's how a Wikipedia article is created. Now, why you can't edit your own article? I did mention that thing about neutrality, right? I don't know anyone who can be neutral about themselves. And so when you edit your own article, it's a really tricky business because we want it to be free of conflict of interest. And so while I love my family, they do have a bit of conflict of interest because they know if they edit my article to make it better and nicer, I might be better and nicer to them. And that's not what we want. We don't want companies coming in and paying people to edit Wikipedia articles. We're not the Yellow Pages. We are an encyclopedia. And so that is really sort of the principle that we come from, is that truthfully, in the world, we have issues with notability, the way that we've determined notability over time, which is what makes you eligible for a Wikipedia article, can and should be interrogated, because there's many people in the world whose notability has been historically overlooked by systems of power and privilege, as I mentioned earlier. And yet, I also do think that this whole idea that you can't create your own article and you can't edit your article is actually really powerful when we think about what the independence is of a project like Wikipedia. So instead of saying, you know, come and fix your article, what we'd say is, let's get more Wikipedia editors, because we want a broader perspective on what knowledge actually means. And so that's our project at the Wikimedia Foundation, is to try to go get more people involved.
And so how do you prevent the self-editing, the very biased editing? How does that happen?
Wikipedians like nothing more than being told when something is wrong so they can go fix it. The only thing that they might like better than that is finding people who are editing in bad faith. They're like the
ruthless.
They are like the detectives. They're like, you have a conflict of interest. Busted.
Flagged. So, as some of you may have noticed, there's some books in the back, and I asked both of our experts who are joining us to recommend further reading on the topic, and so they each recommended 3 books, and I wanted to just have you share those with the audience, maybe like one sentence why each book is a must-read. So from Nick, we have On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Tim Snyder.
It's something that can fit in your pocket and can help you resist tyranny in 20 easy steps. But also talks about respecting
Sounds
language,
useful.
which includes like reading more books and reading books together and getting together and talking about things. And there's also one about just like looking people in the eye and creating small talk. And that's, I think it's so beautiful how like we sort of lose that kind of perspective.
You also recommended, and you mentioned before, Palaces for the People, How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life by Eric Kleinberg, published last year.
So situating public libraries, but other essential sort of like social services and institutions within a broader kind of ecosystem of greater public health outcomes and greater happiness for the public.
Sounds great.
All right.
And your third one was Hope in the Dark, Untold Stories, Wild Possibilities by Rebecca Solnit, 2016.
She's just wonderful, right? I mean, there are like many things why, but one of them is sort of presenting this opportunity to look beyond the certainty of optimism and despair and creating this idea of sort of an unknown hope, but that hope is also, it necessitates action on our part. And she also describes like history in many different ways, but one's like really great where sort of after rain and mushrooms sort of sprout out of the ground kind of mysteriously. It's sort of like those like mushrooms are sort of events that happen throughout history, and they seem like they come out of nowhere, but like a mycologist might say that there's a subsurface giant mushroom that's underneath flowering these smaller mushrooms.
Mycelium, amazing.
It's amazing. I wish Rebecca Solnit was like my 13-year-old daughter's social studies teacher talking about history in that way.
Catherine, your first recommendation was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
Tell us why.
Because that's Wikipedia, man. Don't panic.
Amazing. You also recommended Broadband by Claire Evans.
Because the internet was not only built by dudes, and broadband is a history of everyone who has been left out by popular narrative.
Yes to that. And the last you recommended was The Knowledge Illusion by Philip Fernbach and Stephen Sloman.
So truth be told, I also wanted to recommend a Rebecca Solnit book, but we already had one Solnit, so I felt like we were good.
She literally was like, I've never met this guy, but his book recommendations are legit, so I'm now extremely excited about this event.
Well, I mean, going making book recommendations against the chief librarian is a little intimidating.
No
I'm not
pressure,
gonna lie.
no pressure.
All right, so back to the topic at hand. So the knowledge illusion is the thing that the thing that makes humanity so unique is we have a cultural commons in which our knowledge builds on the knowledge of those who come before, and we do not think in isolation. In fact, we cannot even know in isolation. We can only know together, and that knowledge is something that does not separate us, that binds us not only through language, but across geography, across history, across centuries. And in fact, we're so incredibly fortunate because there are so many points in which humanity almost lost knowledge, and yet other cultures stepped in to make sure that we didn't. And I always think of this when we think about sort of the Dark Ages in Europe and the Golden Age in the Islamic world. And my God, how fortunate are we that humanity continues to build together. It may be the only sort of glimmer right now in dark and uncertain times.
So many feelings. I love this so much. I mean, I was thinking about this conversation this morning, and I was like, this is the most hopeful conversation I'm going to be a part of in a long time, because there's so much to be rightfully deeply concerned about in so many different facets of life in this moment in history, in this place in the world. And so it's really exciting to hear about all these positive things that are going on. And so before we kick it out to you for questions, I have one last one, which is I'm a sucker for romance, and I would like to know if you have any amazing love stories that have grown out of the library or Wikipedia. Can you not only create a more morally and socially just world, but one that's more full of romantic love as well?
I got this, Nick.
Hey, I mean, people make out in the stacks all the time. Is that helpful?
We could leave it there.
Okay.
I know, that's why I'm laughing.
And we let it happen, by the way. It's great.
Librarians are the best. We actually have so many people. We have an expression, come for the article, stay for the people, because Wikipedians are some of the best people you will ever meet. Yes, they are very sort of particular about making sure you are very accurate in your knowledge, but they are just generous, because who else shows up and writes knowledge for the world with no expectation that they will ever be recognized, who just gives. It's just this tremendous exercise in human generosity. And so they fall in love, and we have wiki babies. There are many wiki babies in the world. No joke.
I should have asked for slides of that so we could all just enjoy that.
My board chair and her wife are working on a wiki baby right now.
Well, there we go. On that note, I'd love to turn it over to the audience for some questions.